The Rebel fleet was quite impressive given the Alliance's limited resources. However, there are still a few ship classes that they should have added to it, but didn't. Let's take a look at 5 more of the best. I'm Joey from Radio Free Coruscant, and these are the best ships for Rebels in Star Wars, Volume 2. Crusader-class corvette. First up is a ship that I genuinely can't believe the Rebellion didn't make use of, the Mandal Hypernautics Crusader-class corvette. This was a highly advanced vessel created shortly after the Clone Wars by the Mandalorians. Mandal Hypernautics initially offered it to the Empire, who purchased 2 for testing purposes but declined to order any more, despite the ship's excellent performance. The rejection drove the ship's lead designer into depression, after which he scrapped the design and quit his job. Mandal Hypernautics then offered the ship to the Mandalorian government instead, who purchased many of them, and eventually the company began selling them to other planetary defense forces across the galaxy. The Crusader's initial rejection by the Empire seems like the perfect excuse for these ships to end up serving the Rebel Alliance instead, and like I said, I'm shocked there is no record of the Rebels ever using any. Though on the other hand, the biggest customer of Crusaders was crime lord Tiber Zahn, who also happened to more or less be holding the company hostage by sending his pirates to raid their factories until they agreed to sell ships to him, so perhaps Mandal Hypernautics wouldn't have been allowed to sell to the Rebels, even if they were looking to buy. Now, the Rebels already had several corvette classes in their fleet, but the Crusader would have made a fine addition to their collection nonetheless. It was mostly designed for starfighter screening, though it was considered overarmed for this purpose and could take on other ships its own size with ease. Its weapons were arranged in such a way to leave no gaps in its field of fire, and were so accurate that they could even shoot down missiles and torpedoes in flight. It was also incredibly fast to allow it to move ahead of a capital fleet to engage enemy starfighters before they could reach the other ships, and it was highly automated to make its systems more effective without requiring too many crew. This would make it perfect for any rebel group lacking in starfighters and needing a different way to defend their ships from Imperial TIE fighters, or one looking for a reconnaissance ship, which the Crusaders were known to be used for as well. The size of the Crusader class is unknown, but most corvettes are around the 150-meter range. At a length of 150 meters, it would be about 74 meters wide and 44 tall. It was one of the fastest corvettes ever made at the time of its release, if not the fastest, at a top speed of... apparently we don't know that either. Perhaps around 1,500 kilometers per hour. That would align with its status as one of the fastest. It also had a Class 1 hyperdrive. It was fairly well armed with 2 batteries of 5 point defense laser cannons and 3 standalone point defense laser cannons. The ship required a crew of 80 personnel and could carry no passengers, 3,600 tons of cargo, and 1 year of consumables. The only drawback to the Crusader was its price. At a cost of 5.2 million credits new, or 2.6 million used, it was somewhat expensive, though likely still worth the credits. CR92A Assassin. Next up is the Corellian Engineering Corporation CR92A Assassin class corvette. Now, the Rebels did use a few of these in combat roles and as transports for important cargo and personnel, but I didn't notice that until after I had already made the 3D model for it, so we're keeping it. I'll keep it brief, though. They still could have stood to use more of them, after all. It was by all accounts an excellent ship. The CR92A was a more militarized version of the CR90 corvette that made up the backbone of the Rebel fleet. It had a smaller drive block, more weapons, thicker armor, and a generally sturdier design overall. It was most commonly used by the Empire, who used them in system patrol squadrons fighting against rebels and pirates, but rebels and pirates were also known to use them on occasion as well. The CR92A measured 139.25 meters long by 58.95 meters wide and 16.97 meters tall. It had a Class II hyperdrive, and its top atmospheric speed was unknown but likely around 950 kilometers per hour. It was very well armed for its size, with 6 dual turbo laser batteries, 2 quad laser cannons, a proton torpedo launcher, and a tractor beam projector. It required 60 to 150 crew, depending on the configuration, though unfortunately I don't believe we know what configurations were available. The ship could also carry 60 passengers, 2,100 tons of cargo, and 1 year of consumables. Finally, the CR92A could be acquired for a fairly reasonable 2.5 million credits. Pirate Frigate. Another great ship for the Rebel Alliance would be Captain Silvo's unnamed pirate frigate. We don't actually know if this ship would have been available during the Galactic Civil War, or if there were even other ships like it, but I think it should probably be fine. I doubt the ship was brand new shortly after the war at the time Skeleton Crew took place, and these pirates in particular don't seem the type to build a ship of that size from scratch. Not to mention, its unusual shape doesn't seem like what a pirate would want from a custom ship anyway. This design seems like it would have been created for a very specific purpose, not just shooting at people until they give you all their money. And the purpose I think the pirate frigate was used for is planetary resource surveys. In a video a few months ago, I posited that it might be a separatist ship used to scan a planet's surface for valuable minerals that Silvo's pirates happened to discover and capture for use in piracy. Its shape reminds me of the Munificent and the Sabaoth used by the separatists, and the giant pod is like an inverted version of the so-called Wizard's Tower seen on the Providence. To me, this pod looks like something that would hold large sensors for scanning the ground from low orbit. One of these ships must have strayed into pirate space or something, and was captured by Silvo. And if these pirates found one, the rebels certainly could have as well, either by stealing them from scrapyards, or by the captains of these ships just joining the Alliance themselves. I think they would have been very useful for the Alliance to search planets for good places to put secret bases, or for valuable minerals to use in ship construction or sell to fund the rebellion. Not to mention, the ship was very heavily armed, and would be able to defend itself against Imperial scouts that might discover it, or even fight as a mainline combat frigate. It also had a fairly large hangar for its size, making it perfect for the very starfighter-oriented Rebel fleet. The pirate frigate measured 237.2 meters tall by 185.4 wide and 283.6 long. It had a Class II hyperdrive and a top speed of around 850 kilometers per hour in atmosphere. It was armed with 36 turbo laser batteries and had a starfighter capacity of at least 1 fighter squadron and several dropships or skiffs. The rest of the ship's details are unknown, but I reckon it probably required about 250 crew and could carry 100 passengers, 2,000 tons of cargo, and 2 years of consumables. Based on its size and weapons loadout, it probably cost around 10 million credits. Acclamator. Now, I had a very tough time coming up with a ship for the 4th entry on this list. I knew I wanted something reasonably practical for the rebels to get and use, between 400 and 800 meters in length, that I haven't talked about recently, and that was sourced from a movie or show so that I wouldn't have to create all the footage of it myself. And of the exactly 2 ships I could think of that fit this criteria, the superior choice would almost certainly be the Rothana Heavy Engineering Acclamator-class transgalactic military assault ship. I wasn't sure about this one at first, as the Empire would have presumably kept a tight grip on all former Republic assets, but most Acclamators were destined for the scrapyards after the Empire took over, and it probably wouldn't be too hard to rescue a few of these from there. At least easier than some ships would be. Given that it was more focused on transportation and logistics than combat, it may not have been as high a priority to dismantle as something like a Venator would be. Assuming the rebels could get their hands on some Acclamators, it would be an extremely useful ship for them. For starters, as one of the greatest logistics vessels ever made, it would be a huge help to the Rebellion in ground battles, enabling them to deploy a lot more ground vehicles and liberate planets with a strong Imperial presence more easily. Plus, imagine how much easier the evacuation of Echo Base would have been if they had one of these instead of the fleet of GR-75s. On top of that, it would probably have been possible to convert some of these ships into carriers to provide even more support for the Alliance's starfighter squadrons. The Acclamator measured 752 meters long by 460 meters wide and 183 meters tall. It had a top speed of 1200 kilometers per hour and an extremely fast Class 0.6 hyperdrive with a 250,000 light-year range. The ship was armed with 12 quad turbo-laser turrets, 24 point defense light laser cannons, and 4 heavy missile and torpedo launch tubes, with magazines of 100 high-yield torpedoes and 20 assault concussion missiles each. It required a crew of 700 and could carry 16,000 passengers. More importantly, though, it could carry an incredible amount of cargo, specifically 36 SPHAs, 48 ATTEs, 80 LAATs, 320 speeder bikes, and 11,250 tons of additional miscellaneous cargo. All of that gave it a fairly high price tag of 29 million credits, but all in all that doesn't seem like too bad of a deal to me. Providence. And finally, one of the best ships the rebels missed out on was the Free DAC Volunteers Engineering Corps Rendili Star Drive Providence-class dreadnought, also known as the Providence-class Carrier Destroyer or Providence-class Cruiser Carrier. Apparently they didn't really know what this ship was. At least 3 Providences did end up serving the Rebel Alliance, but like the CR92, I think they really could have benefited from incorporating it into their fleet en masse. Generally speaking, the Rebels didn't really use a lot of separatist ships for optic reasons, but I don't really think these concerns were warranted. The Clone Wars only lasted like 3 years, and it was almost 20 years in the past by the time the Galactic Civil War really began in earnest after the Battle of Yavin, so I think they probably would have been okay to use them. Especially the Providence. As a Quarren ship, it looks a lot like, and would fit in with, the Rebellion's Mon Calamari ships quite nicely. And of course, there would be dozens, if not hundreds, of these ships ripe for the picking in scrapyards across the galaxy for any rebel cells needing to grab a heavy warship. The Providence would have been the perfect ship for the Rebel Alliance too. It was extremely well armed, bordering on comically so, and had a huge hangar bay that would make it very well suited to the Rebellion's starfighter heavy tactics. It was very durable as well, and so versatile its creators seemingly didn't know what to classify it as. Overall, it was one of the best warships of the Clone Wars, possibly even eclipsing the Venator, and would surely have held up well even in the Imperial era. The Providence was much like the Recusant-class light destroyer in that it bafflingly came in 2 sizes, one twice as large as the other. This seems to come from some scaling issues in the Clone Wars, and I reject the notion that we must take this production mistake as the gospel in-universe truth and say that they built this thing in 2 entirely different sizes. Especially because there doesn't even seem to be a difference between them like there is on the Recusant, with the larger version of that adding a hangar bay. I found a fairly comprehensive analysis of this issue that I will link to in the description if you're interested, and I may go over it in more detail someday when I make a solo video about the Providence. In essence, the author, Barragond45, looked at several pieces of evidence and determined that the real size of the Providence is actually almost exactly halfway between the 2 stated sizes of it. So that's the size I'm going to go with. Supposedly, it could be either 1,088 or 21,077 meters long, but it is almost always depicted at 1,580 meters long by 533 meters tall and 284 meters wide. All of the other stats, except the price, are identical between the 2 supposed variants of the ship, further proof that it should just be one size. It had a pretty good Class 1.5 hyperdrive, and an absolutely astonishing top atmospheric speed of 2,000 kilometers per hour. The ship was very well armed with 14 quad heavy turbolaser batteries, 34 dual heavy laser cannons, 2 battleship ion cannons, 12 heavy mass driver flak cannons, 12 twin light point defense laser cannons, 102 proton torpedo launchers, and 10 heavy tractor beam projectors. Its enormous hangar could house 240 light starfighters, typically 120 vulture droids, and 120 droid tri-fighters, though it would obviously not be able to hold that many manned starfighters. It could also carry over 100 various other vehicles, including MTTs, landing craft, shuttles, and ship's boats. Despite its large size, the ship required a crew of only 900 thanks to a large amount of automation, and it could carry 48,247 passengers, 1.5 million deactivated battle droids, plus 18,000 tons of other cargo, and 4 years of consumables. And finally, it came in at a steep but understandable cost of 125 million credits. And those are 5 more ships the Rebels should have had in their fleet. They did use a couple of them sparingly, but oh well. The number of ships that we know they could have used but didn't is pretty small. Let me know which of these was your favorite, or what you would have selected instead in the comments, and check out the first installment of this video topic next. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next week. RFC, out.